Have you ever sat alone with a cup of coffee, thinking about how things used to be between you and your kids? Maybe you raised them with love, discipline, and everything you had, and yet today the connection feels distant. Maybe you wonder, do they even think about me the way I think about them? It's a tough place to be when your children grow up. They don't just grow taller or move out. They grow more independent, more opinionated, and sometimes more distant. And whether they say it out loud or not, there are moments when their silence or their choices feel like rejection. But here's something most parents don't realize until much later. Your kids will never admit this, but there's one thing that truly shakes their ego, and it has nothing to do with yelling, scolding, or trying to win an argument. It's something much quieter and far more powerful. So let's talk. This isn't just another video telling you to just let go or focus on yourself. This is about understanding what's really going on underneath the surface, the emotions your children won't talk about, the regret they'll never confess, and the silent strength you have as a parent, even when they make you feel powerless. You see, most adult children never say out loud when they're wrong, especially if the mistake was walking away from a parent who loved them deeply. They won't come back and say, "Mom, you were right," or "Dad, I wish I had handled things differently." That kind of admission bruises the ego, and for many grown kids, especially those who are still figuring themselves out, that ego is fragile. After all, they were raised in a world that told them to chase independence, stand their ground, and cut out anyone who's toxic, even when that so-called toxicity might just be a parent setting boundaries, expressing concern, or trying to stay involved. So when a child chooses distance, they often convince themselves they did the right thing. They tell themselves it was necessary. They might even hear their friends saying, "You don't owe anyone anything," and for a while that belief sticks. But here's what they don't expect. They don't expect the parent they left behind to stop chasing. They don't expect silence. They don't expect you to grow stronger in the quiet. Because that's when the doubt begins, not in the heat of the argument, not in the middle of the tears, but in the stillness that follows. When you no longer call, when you no longer ask, when your voice fades from their daily life, not out of anger, but out of acceptance. And that acceptance, that's what shakes them. You see, we're often told that love means never giving up, but sometimes holding on too tightly is the very thing that pushes people further away, especially grown children who are trying to prove their self-sufficiency. That's why pleading, begging for attention, affection, or answers never works. It actually does the opposite. When you send long messages hoping they'll respond, when you ask mutual friends if they're okay, when you try to explain why they should come back around, you're not making things better. You're confirming what they already believe, that they're in control, that they hold all the power. And that power, if we're honest, is something they didn't earn. They may have pulled away. They may have made choices you don't agree with, but you're still their parent. You gave years, decades of your life to raise them, protect them, love them. And while love doesn't demand payback, it also doesn't mean you should settle for being disrespected or dismissed. So what do you do? How do you stop the cycle of hurt without becoming bitter or cold? You begin by staying calm. That may sound simple, but in reality it takes immense strength. Because when your child hurts you, intentionally or not, the natural reaction is to react, to cry, to explain, to try harder. But those reactions, as human as they are, rarely lead to healing. Real healing starts when you learn to respond differently. When you feel the urge to reach out, pause. When you start to rehearse what you want to say, take a breath. When your mind wanders into, "What did I do wrong?" gently remind yourself, not every distance is your fault. This kind of calm isn't passive. It's not about giving up. It's about standing still with dignity. Because silence, true, composed silence, has a power that words can't match. It doesn't feed the ego. It doesn't validate bad behavior. It simply says, "I'm here, I'm steady, and I'm no longer trying to force something that should come naturally." And what happens when you stop reacting? Your child begins to feel the absence, not just your voice, but your presence, your influence, the warmth that used to follow them even when they weren't paying attention. They may not say anything right away. They may even pretend not to notice. But trust me, somewhere deep in their mind, a shift begins. They start to wonder why you're so calm, why you're not pleading, why your world isn't revolving around them anymore. And that mystery, it speaks volumes. Because in a world where everyone is loud, the one who stays quiet often has the most power. That quiet, your quiet, isn't a punishment. It's a reset. A chance for both of you to rethink, realign, and remember what really matters. You're not slamming doors or throwing blame. You're simply reclaiming your peace. And in doing so, you're showing a kind of strength that very few people of any age ever master. That's what disrupts their perception. That's what plants the seed of regret. They may not admit it. They may not even realize it fully. But somewhere inside, your calmness, your distance, your self-respect begins to challenge their story. Because here's the truth. People don't regret what you say. They regret what they can no longer access. And when your child begins to see that your love is no longer chasing them, that your energy is now directed inward into your own healing, your own joy, your own peace, something shifts. The ego doesn't know what to do with that. And in that quiet moment, for the first time in a long time, they might begin to feel something they never expected. Regret. Not because you forced it, but because you didn't. You might be surprised by how powerful that silence can be. It doesn't scream. It doesn't slam the door on the way out. But it speaks. And what it says, especially to your grown kids, is this: I'm no longer waiting for your approval to feel whole. That's not easy. As parents, we spend so many years trying to be involved, trying to stay close, trying to keep that bond alive no matter what. It can feel unnatural to pull back and just be quiet. But when you stop trying to explain yourself, when you stop trying to be understood and start focusing on being grounded, something unexpected happens. They start to notice. Not because you posted a quote online, not because you told them you were hurt, but because you didn't. And that missing reaction, that's what lingers in their mind. That's what unsettles the image they had of you. The one where you were always there, always reachable, always ready to smooth things over. Now, instead of knowing exactly where they stand with you, they're left with uncertainty. And nothing stirs the mind quite like uncertainty. They start to wonder, why haven't I heard from Mom lately? Why didn't Dad comment on that photo? Is something wrong, or have they finally moved on from caring what I think? That kind of shift doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be real. And that's where a deeper kind of strength comes in. Not the strength to prove something to anyone, but the strength to rebuild your life quietly, from the inside out. Because here's the truth, your child's choices don't have to define the rest of your story. Yes, it hurts. Yes, the silence on their end can feel like rejection. But you are not finished. You are not forgotten. And you are certainly not powerless. In fact, you have more power now than you may have ever had. The power to focus on your own healing. The power to invest in the parts of yourself that may have been put on hold. The power to become someone even more fulfilled than you were before the silence started. And the best part, you don't have to broadcast it. You don't need to prove to anyone how well you're doing. You just do it. Maybe you start walking again each morning, not to clear your head of sadness, but to feed your body with fresh air and movement. Maybe you pick up a hobby you used to love before life got so complicated. Maybe you finally join that group or take that trip, or have that long lunch with a friend, without worrying if your child will call while you're out. You start to live, not in spite of the distance, but because you deserve a life that's whole, with or without their constant presence. And when that shift happens, when your life starts expanding again, even quietly, it creates a new reality. One where you are no longer the parent who's always waiting by the phone. You become the parent who's still growing, still becoming, still living. And that, more than anything, challenges their ego. Because suddenly, they're not the center of your world. And if we're honest, that's hard for anyone to realize, especially when they've been used to it for so long. But don't mistake this for revenge. This isn't about playing games. It's about healing, quiet, intentional healing. It's about giving yourself the space to become even more grounded, even more at peace, even more whole than you were before, because there's something else people never talk about enough. When you stop chasing, you don't just confuse them. You also set yourself free. Free from needing a certain response. Free from rehearsing what to say. Free from walking on eggshells trying to keep the peace. Instead, you give them space, and more importantly, you give yourself space to breathe. Now here's the part no one tells you. Many times they come back. Maybe not with an apology, maybe not with a grand gesture, but they come back. It starts with something small. A text, a birthday card, a comment on a photo, a question that doesn't really need an answer. Something subtle, something that seems casual. But make no mistake, it's a test. They want to see if the door is still open. They want to know if they still have a place in your mind, if they still have influence over how you feel. And it's at this moment that most parents give in. They get hopeful. They jump to reply. They think, this is it. They miss me. But here's the hard truth. Sometimes they don't miss you. They miss the version of you that made them feel important. They miss the emotional safety net, the constant love that didn't require anything in return. And if you give them that reaction too soon, if you jump to reconnect without thinking, it can actually undo the growth you've made. Because their ego isn't back to reconnect. It's back to test control. Now you don't need to be harsh. You don't need to ignore them forever. But you do need to pause, breathe, and ask yourself, am I responding from peace or from fear of losing them again? Am I opening this door because I've healed or because I want something from them? Because how you answer that question changes everything. If you do choose to respond, keep it light. Keep it neutral. No emotions spilled all over the page. No longing wrapped in politeness. Just calm, kind clarity. Not cold, not passive-aggressive, but solid, unshaken. And if they truly want to rebuild, if they truly regret, then they'll show it over time. Not in one message, not in one dinner, but in consistency. But here's the key. By the time they come back, you shouldn't need them to. Your life should already feel full. Your heart should already feel lighter. Your joy should not depend on whether they stay or go. Because you've done the work quietly, steadily, day by day. You've let the pain shape you, not define you. You've learned how to sit with grief without letting it become your identity. And now you stand not bitter, not broken, but resilient. And when your child sees that, that's when the real regret begins. Not because you forced it, not because you played games, but because you grew in ways they didn't expect. You didn't just survive the distance. You used it as fuel. You became more than the version of yourself they walked away from. And that kind of growth, it's undeniable even if they never say a word. By the time your kids begin to notice the changes in you, the calm, the silence, the self-assurance, it's no longer about whether they come back. The real question becomes, do you even need them to? And that's not a question rooted in anger or pride. It's a question born from growth. There comes a point in every parent's journey when you realize that being strong doesn't mean holding on. It means knowing when to let go, not in a bitter, dramatic way, but in a gentle, wise way that says, I've done my part. I've loved, I've given, and now I'm choosing peace. That moment, though quiet, is life-changing, because your kids might never fully understand what you've carried. They may never know about the nights you stayed up worried about them. They may never appreciate the sacrifices you made, the ones you never spoke about out loud. But and now you also know that your worth isn't determined by their recognition. It's easy, especially as we get older, to feel like we've become invisible, like we've given so much, and somehow we've faded into the background. But that's a lie that loneliness whispers. The truth is, you are still becoming, still valuable, still radiant with wisdom, experience, and the quiet power of resilience. And that resilience, it changes everything. You stop asking yourself if they regret what they did, or if they miss who you were. You stop checking your phone, wondering if today is the day they reach out. You stop shrinking yourself into someone who's just waiting to be remembered, because now you remember yourself. You remember that you are more than someone's mom or dad. You are a whole person, a person with stories, with dreams, with lessons still to teach and even more still to learn. And the most powerful part of all is this: you no longer need to win them back to feel whole again. Because the goal was never to make them regret. The goal was to reclaim your life. And now you have. You wake up with a little more clarity. You breathe a little deeper. You smile not because life is perfect, but because you are finally at peace with what you cannot control. You begin to see that their choices belong to them and your happiness belongs to you. And yes, there may still be days when your heart aches a little. That's part of being a parent. Loving deeply means feeling deeply, but you've learned how to carry that feeling without letting it crush you. You've learned how to stand tall with a heart that's still soft, but a spine that's unshakable. That's what it means to be a resilient parent, not a perfect parent, not a faultless one, but a resilient one. The kind of parent who doesn't need to prove their worth through guilt or control. The kind of parent who doesn't crumble when someone walks away. The kind of parent who rises quietly, steadily, and shows their children what real strength looks like. And here's something else your kids will never admit. But deep down, they feel it. They may never come out and say, "You were right." They may never look you in the eye and whisper, "I miss you." They may never even acknowledge what they lost when they drifted away. But their silence doesn't mean they're unaffected. In fact, that's often when they're feeling it the most. When they scroll through their phone and see a photo of you smiling, truly smiling, not with sadness behind your eyes, but with peace. When they hear from someone else how well you're doing, how active you are, how much you're enjoying life. When they suddenly realize that you're no longer waiting on them to feel fulfilled. That's when the ego breaks. Not from a dramatic confrontation, not from a tear-filled letter, but from your quiet, steady, graceful rise. Because now, you've become someone they can no longer easily place. You've changed, you've evolved, and you've done it without them. And that's what destroys the ego. They don't regret losing someone who begged. They regret losing someone who became even stronger without them. But by the time they feel it, you won't need to hear it. You won't need their apology, because you've already won. You've won back your time. You've reclaimed your peace. You've discovered who you are outside of someone else's story. And in doing so, you've written a new chapter, one that isn't filled with waiting or longing or regret, but with presence, purpose, and quiet power. So if you're still in the middle of the ache, if the silence between you and your children still stings, know this: you are not alone and you are not powerless. You have more strength than you think. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to beg for love that should flow freely. You don't need to carry guilt for decisions you didn't make. What you need, what you already have, is the power to choose yourself, to rise without looking back, to love without losing yourself, to live not in reaction to who walked away, but in full embrace of who you are today. And here's the beautiful thing: when you live like that, people notice. Sometimes your kids will circle back, not because you chased them, but because they saw you grow without them. And sometimes they won't, but either way, you're still moving forward. You're still living, still becoming, still proving every single day that peace is not something you wait for. It's something you choose. So if this message spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. Let someone else know they're not alone either. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Like this video if it helped you in any way, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more real, honest, empowering conversations like this one. Because no matter your age, your best life isn't behind you. It's right here, right now, and it's yours to live fully, freely, and with dignity. Here's to rising without needing revenge. Here's to becoming the parent they never expected, but will never forget. And here's to living your best life at any age.